President Anderson, members of the faculty, Board of Trustees, distinguished guests, my old colleague, Senator Bob Byrd, who has earned his degree through many years of attending Knight Law School, while I am earning mine in the next 30 minutes, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It is with great pride that I participate in this ceremony of the American University, sponsored by the Methodist Church, founded by Bishop John Fletcher Hurst, and first opened by President Woodrow Wilson in 1914. This is a young and growing university, but it has already fulfilled Bishop Hurst's enlightened hope for the study of history and public affairs in a city devoted to the making of history and to the conduct of the public's business. By sponsoring this institution of higher learning for all who wish to learn, whatever their color or their creed, the Methodists of this area and the nation deserve the nation's thanks. And I commend all those who are today graduating. Professor Woodrow Wilson once said that every man sent out from a university should be a man of his nation as well as a man of his time. And I'm confident that the men and women who carry the honor of graduating from this institution will continue to give from their lives, from their talents, a high measure of public service and public support. There are few earthly things more beautiful than a university, wrote John Masefield in his tribute to English universities, and his words are equally true today. He did not refer to towers or to campuses. He admired the splendid beauty of a university because it was, he said, a place where those who hate ignorance may strive to know, where those who perceive truth may strive to make others see. I have therefore chosen this time and place to discuss a topic on which ignorance too often abounds and the truth too rarely perceived, and that is the most important topic on earth, peace. What kind of a peace do I mean, and what kind of a peace do we seek? Not a Pax Americana enforced on the world by American weapons of war, not the peace of the grave or the security of the slave. I am talking about genuine peace, the kind of peace that makes life on earth worth living, the kind that enables men and nations to grow and to hope and build a better life for their children. Not merely peace for Americans, but peace for all men and women. Not merely peace in our time, but peace in all time. I speak of peace because of the new face of war. Total war makes no sense in an age where great powers can maintain large and relatively invulnerable nuclear forces and refuse to surrender without resort to those forces. It makes no sense in an age where a single nuclear weapon contains almost 10 times the explosive force delivered by all the Allied air forces in the Second World War. It makes no sense in an age when the deadly poisons produced by a nuclear exchange would be carried by wind and water and soil and seed to the far corners of the globe and to generations yet unborn. Today, the expenditure of billions of dollars every year on weapons acquired for the purpose of making sure we never need them is essential to the keeping of peace. But surely the acquisition of such idle stockpiles, which can only destroy and never create, is not the only, much less the most efficient, means of assuring peace. I speak of peace, therefore, as the necessary, rational end of rational men. I realize the pursuit of peace is not as dramatic as the pursuit of war, and frequently the words of the pursuers fall on deaf ears, but we have no more urgent task. Some say that it is useless to speak of peace or world law or world disarmament.
You have been watching perhaps one of the most disgraceful performances by an American president at a summit in front of a Russian leader, certainly that I've ever seen. An extraordinary press conference. I'm back with CNN Global Affairs analyst Susan Glasser, CNN senior political analyst David Gergen, CNN chief international anchor Christian Amanpour. Christian, the president, given the opportunity, asked by a reporter, an American reporter, who he trusted on the issue of Russian meddling, the U.S. intelligence community or Vladimir Putin, he blinked and he went to Hillary Clinton's email server, asked who was responsible. He says, I hold both countries responsible. I think we are all to blame. We have a chance to do some great things. Made no mention of Georgia, shoot down of a Malaysian plane, Crimea, Ukraine, and election interference. In fact, he went on to say all he can do is ask the question about election interference, that Vladimir Putin was very powerful in his denial of it. And the president went on to say he doesn't see any reason why it would have been Russia who interfered in the election.
I think that was the nut graph. I don't see any reason why it would have been Russia hacking into our election.
And that it will be useless until the leaders of the Soviet Union adopt a more enlightened attitude. I hope they do. I believe we can help them do it. But I also believe that we must re-examine our own attitudes as individuals and as a nation. For our attitude is as essential as theirs. And every graduate of this school, every thoughtful citizen who despairs of war and wishes to bring peace should begin by looking inward, by examining his own attitude towards the possibilities of peace, towards the Soviet Union.
And he then said that, Putin came up with a great offer as to how to figure this out, which, of course, Putin responded, as he always does, with the sort of obfuscation. Yes, we have a sort of treaty on various issues, but you have to send us a formal letter, and then we'll respond, and then we'll reciprocate, but only in kind. We need to have people of interest, etc. So it's very typical Putin response. But that was an incredible statement.
David Gergen, have you ever seen anything like this?
No, and it's a struggle to put it all together, isn't it? And to comprehend what we just heard. I mean, I've never heard an American president talk that way, but I think it's especially true that when he's with someone, like Putin, who is a thug, a world-class thug, that he sides with him again and again against his own country's interests, his own institutions that he runs, that he's in charge of the federal government, he's in charge of these intelligence agencies. And he basically dismisses them, and he retreats into this. We've heard this again and again, but on an international stage, to be talking about Hillary's server and
it's embarrassing.
Brilliant campaign is embarrassing.
I want to go to Jim Acosta, who's in the room. Jim,
towards the course of the Cold War and towards freedom and peace here at home. First, examine our attitude towards peace itself. Too many of us think it is impossible. Too many think it is unreal. But that is a dangerous, defeatist belief. It leads to the conclusion that war is inevitable, that mankind is doomed, that we are gripped by forces we cannot control. We need not accept that view. Our problems are man-made. Therefore, they can be solved by man. And man can be as big as he wants. No problem of human destiny is beyond human beings. Man's reason and spirit have often solved the seemingly unsolvable, and we believe they can do it again.
Yeah, Anderson, I think what you were just saying there a few moments ago, I think that sums it up nicely. I mean, this was the President of the United States essentially taking the word of the Russian President Vladimir Putin over his own intelligence community, over his own law enforcement community on this critical question of Russian interference in the 2016 election. And I think when Vladimir Putin was asked that question by Jonathan Lemire of the Associated Press at the very end there, whether or not the Russians had compromising information on President Trump, I thought it was very interesting that Vladimir Putin paused for a few moments, seeming to understand the question, but not exactly sure how to answer it. And there was some nervous laughter in the room. I don't know if you could hear that on the microphones in the room, but there was some nervous laughter. It took all of us by surprise. It sounded as if Vladimir Putin was trying at that point to come up with a good answer, and he didn't really have one. I thought it was striking, Anderson, that the Russian president did offer to allow Robert Mueller's team to come over to Russia and continue his investigation. I'm not sure that would be greeted very well by President Trump, given that that would probably extend the life of the Russia investigation. But I will tell you, it was astonishing, just astonishing, to be in the room with the U.S. president and with the Russian president on this critical question of election interference, and to hear the president of the United States retreat back to these talking points about DNC servers and Hillary Clinton's emails when he had a chance right there in front of us, right there in front of the world, to confront Vladimir Putin and tell him to stay the hell out of American democracy, and he just didn't do it. It was one of those moments, I think. Obviously, we all think this is a very big deal right now, and sometimes these sorts of things can fade away, but I don't think this is one of those moments. This is one of those moments, Anderson, I think really crystallizes a very critical problem for the United States right now, and that you have the president, the leader of the free world, taking the word of Vladimir Putin, who, from all accounts, inside the U.S. government, the U.S. intelligence community, the law enforcement community, attacked American democracy in 2016. You know, when Vladimir Putin was asked whether he wanted Trump to win, that might have been the only honest moment of this news conference, when Vladimir Putin said yes, he did want President Trump to win, and then shortly after that handed him that soccer ball. They came across as playmates on a soccer field more than they did international rivals, Anderson. The President of the United States very much yielding the field on this day to Vladimir Putin. Anderson?
Yes.
I am not referring to the absolute, infinite concept of universal peace and goodwill, of which some fantasies and fanatics dream. I do not deny the value of hopes and dreams, but we merely invite discouragement and incredulity by making that our only and immediate goal. Let us focus instead on a more practical, more attainable peace, based not on a sudden revolution in human nature, but on a gradual evolution in human institutions, on a series of concrete actions and effective agreements which are in the interests of all concerned. There is no single simple key to this peace, no grand or magic formula to be adopted by one or two powers. Genuine peace must be the product of many nations, the sum of many acts. It must be dynamic, not static, changing to meet the challenge of each new generation. For peace is a process, a way of solving problems. With such a peace, there will still be quarrels and conflicting interests, as there are within families and nations. World peace, like community peace, does not require that each man love his neighbor. It requires only that they live together in mutual tolerance, submitting their disputes to a just and peaceful settlement. And history teaches us that enmities between nations, as between individuals, do not last forever. However fixed our likes and dislikes may seem, the tide of time and events will often bring surprising changes in the relations between nations and neighbors. So let us persevere. Peace need not be impractical, and war need not be inevitable. By defining our goal more clearly, by making it seem more manageable and less remote, we can help all people to see it, to draw hope from it, and to move irresistibly towards it. And second, let us re-examine our attitude towards the Soviet Union. It is discouraging to think that their leaders may actually believe what their propagandists write. It is discouraging to read a recent authoritative Soviet text on military strategy and find on page after page wholly baseless and incredible claims, such as the allegation that American imperialist circles are preparing to unleash different types of war, that there is a very real threat of a preventative war being unleashed by American imperialists against the Soviet Union, and that the political aims, and I quote, of the American imperialists are to enslave economically and politically the European and other capitalist countries and to achieve world domination by means of aggressive war, unquote. Truly, as it was written long ago, the wicked flee when no man pursueth. Yet it is sad to read these Soviet statements, to realize the extent of the gulf between us. But it is also a warning to the American people not to fall into the same trap as the Soviets, not to see only a distorted and desperate view of the other side, not to see conflict as inevitable.
You know, it's really, I think we are going to remember this day for a long time. You know, sometimes there are indelible images that come out. Certainly, George W. Bush talking about Vladimir Putin's soul. I think this moment is going to go down with that moment, for me at least, to hear the President of the United States attacking Robert Mueller's investigation, questioning the U.S. intelligence agencies, the work of his own Justice Department, while standing literally next to Vladimir Putin. He called the probe a disaster for our country as Russia's leader looked on. He began the summit meeting this morning with that extraordinary tweet in which he said that essentially the United States is to blame for the bad state of relations with Russia.
Accommodation as impossible, and communication as nothing more than an exchange of threats. No government or social system is so evil that its people must be considered as lacking in virtue. As Americans, we find communism profoundly repugnant as a negation of personal freedom and dignity. But we can still hail the Russian people for their many achievements in science and space, in economic and industrial growth, in culture, in acts of courage. Among the many traits the peoples of our two countries have in common, none is stronger than our mutual abhorrence of war. Almost unique among the major world powers, we have never been at war with each other. And no nation in the history of battle ever suffered more than the Soviet Union in the Second World War. At least 20 million lost their lives. Countless millions of homes and families were burned or sacked. A third of the nation's territory, including 2/3 of its industrial base, was turned into a wasteland, a loss equivalent to the destruction of this country east of Chicago. Today, should total war ever break out again, no matter how, our two countries will be the primary target. It is an ironic but accurate fact that the two strongest powers are the two in the most danger of devastation. All we have built, all we have worked for, would be destroyed in the first 24 hours. And even in the Cold War, which brings burdens and dangers to so many countries, including this nation's closest allies, our two countries bear the heaviest burdens. For we are both devoting massive sums of money to weapons that could be better devoted to combat ignorance, poverty, and disease. We are both caught up in a vicious and dangerous cycle, with suspicion on one side breeding suspicion on the other, and new weapons begetting counter-weapons. In short, both the United States and its allies, and the Soviet Union and its allies, have a mutually deep interest in a just and genuine peace and in holding the arms race. Agreements to this end are in the interests of the Soviet Union as well as ours, and even the most hostile nations can be relied upon to accept and keep those treaty obligations, and only those treaty obligations, which are in their own interest. So let us not be blind to our differences, but let us also direct attention to our common interests and the means by which those differences can be resolved. And if we cannot end now our differences, at least we can help make the world safe for diversity. For in the final analysis, our most basic common link is that we all inhabit this small planet. We all breathe the same air. We all cherish our children's futures, and we are all mortal. Third, let us re-examine our attitude towards the Cold War, remembering we're not engaged in a debate, seeking to pile up debating points. We are not here distributing blame or pointing the finger of judgment. We must deal with the world as it is, and not as it might have been had the history of the last 18 years been different. We must therefore persevere in the search for peace in the hope that constructive changes within the communist bloc might bring within reach solutions which now seem beyond us. We must conduct our affairs in such a way that it becomes in the communist interest to agree on a genuine peace, and above all, while defending our own vital interests, nuclear powers must avert those confrontations which bring an adversary to a choice of either a humiliating retreat or a nuclear war. To adopt that kind of course in the nuclear age would be evidence only of the bankruptcy of our policy or of a collective death wish for the world. To secure these ends, America's weapons are non-provocative, carefully controlled, designed to deter, and capable of selective use. Our military forces are committed to peace and disciplined in self-restraint. Our diplomats are instructed to avoid unnecessary irritants and purely rhetorical hostility, for we can seek a relaxation of tensions without relaxing our guard. And for our part, we do not need to use threats to prove we are resolute. We do not need to jam foreign broadcasts out of fear our faith will be eroded. We are unwilling to impose our system on any unwilling people, but we are willing and able to engage in peaceful competition